Okay, all right, everyone, welcome. We're going to get started because we have lots to talk about. So welcome all, and thank you for joining us on this panel discussion on decolonizing the Catalogue vendor library collaborations. So before we get started, first we would like to acknowledge that we are located on the traditional lands of the first people of Charleston, and we also acknowledge the lives and labor of the Africans who were enslaved to build Charleston. Please see the acknowledgement from College of Charleston Libraries on the slide behind us. So in this session, we will explore the challenges that librarians and vendors encounter when working on increasing the diversity and inclusivity of their collections. And specifically, we'll focus on issues surfacing when libraries look to center stories and people whose voices have been pushed to the sidelines of scholarly and archival library collections. So our panel members span those working on scholarly and archival collections, as well as working on the vendor side, that's me and Louise, as well as the library side, Elaina and Erica. And we all come from different localities, institutions, and backgrounds, as well as approaches. But I think what unites us is that we believe that for advancing this work, it is essential that vendors work really closely with the libraries. And especially that really vendors' efforts couldn't be effective if they happen in isolation from the experts working on the library side. And that is really how the idea for this panel was born, to bring closer the two perspectives and explore where they converge. So we're really delighted that Erica and Elaina have agreed to join us to give their insight on this hugely important work, the projects that they have been working on, but also their perspective on the projects that we have been working on. So it is in the spirit of collaboration and openness to being challenged, especially on the vendor side, that we want to start a discussion. So this panel will have the format of a discussion, and we're going to start with a short round of introductions, and then Elaina will be posing questions to the panel. But after that, we will open the floor to discussion, and we really want to hear from all of you about your questions, ideas, and different projects that you all have been working on. Yeah, and we hope that this exploration will really kind of spark approaches for new collaborations between vendors and librarians. So with all that, I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Kasia Figiel. I work for Sage Publications on our Sage Research Methods online platform, which is a multimedia platform that includes a vast array of resources that support social science researchers in thinking about their research projects and learning about the methodology and conducting their research. And I will hand over now.
All right, I'll go first. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this evening, almost evening. My name's Erica Bruchko, and I'm the African American Studies and United States History Librarian at Emory in Atlanta, so not very far away. And this is my first time at the Charleston Conference, and it's been so engaging and stimulating. So thank you again for coming.
Hi, everyone. I'm Louise Hemmings. I'm the Editorial Director at AM. For those of you who don't know, AM are a publisher of primary source collections, digital primary source collections. We've published about 150 collections to date and are continuing to publish collections every year. Hopefully some of you are familiar with them. And delighted to be coming back to Charleston.
Hello, everybody. I am Elaina Norlin. I am the professional development person for the Association of Southeastern Research Libraries. And how many of my ASERL people are here in the room? Not many, so let me back up. Okay, so the Association of Southeastern Research Libraries is a member consortium, about 38 members of the southeastern region of the country. We are all the way from Florida, all the way up through Maryland, over to the Arkansas, back down again and around. So we are mainly Research 1 and Research 2 institutions. And my job in the organization is to not only coordinate training, I do site visits, I do listening tours, I do in-person training, And for some people who have recognized me, I also do our ASERL professional development webinar series, and you probably have seen my face from there. So that is a little bit of background for me. And we want to go to the first question, what are the biggest challenges for librarians engaging in the work of decolonizing library catalogs? And the second part of that is, how can vendors better collaborate with libraries on this work? I'm going to start first because I have the mic, and also because I wanted to give a little bit of context. That's why I wanted to explain to you my job. I spend a lot of time not only, talking to libraries of all different sizes, not in our member libraries, but outside of member libraries. And I also work to figure out large-scale training that we need to do, that I see patterns of things that are happening. And so what I would like to talk about a little bit is sort of the work that we were doing in this area, like before the pandemic, and some of the challenges that have been happening sort of post-pandemic. So for some of our members, that what we've had is that during the pandemic, especially during the time during George Floyd and our activism in terms of social change, there was a lot of activity going on, not only in to really look at our collections, but what was nice is not nice because we're in the pandemic, but what was nice is that we had the time to do most collaborative work. So what we had is different departments coming together and from our public side and our technical sides coming together and sort of really starting to look at the catalog, starting to look at the work and to see how we can make changes. We were also listening to webinars from other people who were coming in. I was doing webinars on people to try to get a little bit of background. And there was a lot more collaboration on this, and where people felt like they were making progress. But another thing that we also realized from the work is that we expected the work to go faster than it really was going. And it was a lot of painful work, and it was a lot of questions of how to work on this work and involve the community and what community members needed to be involved and how to incorporate that and then still manage expectations on the change that might be happening within our infrastructures that have been this way for a long time, right? So that was some of the major questions that were going on, that kind of combination of, it was great to be collaborative and it was great to do that work, but a lot of it was, we didn't realize the different challenges it was to actually get the work to move. So the expectations of it moving, but not moving that fast. What has happened for us, and I'm not saying that this is all of our member libraries at all, but some of, especially our smaller ones, that post-pandemic with the sort of people resigning, less people at the job, burnout in our hybrid kind of remote, sort of hybrid, sort of remote kind of work doesn't really lend us into that same kind of collaboration that we had. So what I've been finding is that people have been a little bit more frustrated. And as if you saw that what I said in the beginning, I'm from the South. So we also have that other layer in some of my institutions where the work is not even supposed to be done, right? And so from the DEI backlash, I live in Florida. We've got a lot of different things happening. For us, in terms of how vendors can partner, when I talk to our members and ask them this question and pose them, from the sort of burnout and the exhaustion and wanting to do the work. So I've never had anybody say that they didn't want to do the work. They're just trying to creatively figure out ways to continue the work with work-life balance, with trying to get everything else that they have to get done. And they want to be able to rely and trust on the vendors that they are doing the work, but they also want to be part of the process. How can they be part of the process, but acknowledging that they might not have as much time as they had during the pandemic? Another thing that has come up is that in some cases, do we trust the vendor to do all of the work, especially when it comes to that community piece that is important? And another thing that I'm going to talk a little bit more later is for my smaller places, they're not here at Charleston. They don't come to these big conferences. they're not at the tables. They're not the ones that people point out and say, hey, can you join this, advisory board or this committee, because they're not here to do those networking and things like that. And they need to, and they want to be part of those conversations, because usually it's our smaller ones that are usually the ones that are more burned out. I'm not saying than the bigger libraries, but they have less people to work on this, and they feel feeling really frustrated that they don't have the money or the resources to do it, but they want to be also part of the process. So those are sort of a summary of some of the things that I've saw from a big picture, and you guys can ask me any questions about the smaller during the Q&A. I'm going to turn it over now to Erica, that she's going to provide some additional feedback.
Great, thank you, Elaina. It's so nice to have this overview and discussion of multiple ASERL libraries. My comments are going to be quite Emory-specific or institution-specific, and even more so my own experiences. So I hope to highlight a few projects that I've been involved in, and through this, I really think that some of the collaborations that we're going to be talking about and will come up throughout our talks will manifest themselves. So the first project I'd like to highlight is my work with the African American Subject Funnel Project. And I don't know if Glenda Alvin is here, but she is a wonderful partner in this work and very involved in Charleston, in the Charleston Conference. But the funnel project, and any funnel really, is a kind of cooperative of librarians. And we have librarians from public libraries, from academic libraries, from HBCUs, who work together to provide feedback to the Library of Congress through the PCC, or the Program for Cooperative Cataloging. So I got involved in this work in 2017. I subsequently became the subject chair of the group. But we've successfully petitioned for the addition of several dozen terms, and that might seem like a few. We've been working for maybe 7 years, but it is quite a slow process, and that's one of the challenges that we can discuss a little further. But we've petitioned for very local subject headings, like the Atlanta Race Massacre. I'm from Atlanta, and kind of the specter of 1906 really looms large in many of our imaginations, and having that particular term was quite important to me. But then there's also very surprising and large omissions within the Library of Congress subject authorities, which will surprise no one here. But some of the things that we've updated are historically Black colleges and universities. There wasn't a subject heading for that. There wasn't a subject heading for Middle Passage or for the Great Migration. So really, really big concepts in the history of the US and arguably internationally. We've also embarked on projects to update terms from Blacks to Black people, from slaves to enslaved people, to emphasize the personhood of these individuals. And I don't have time to go into depth about how this work happens, but I do want to emphasize how much of a collaboration it is. I am not a cataloger, and so going into this incredibly technical work, working with the Library of Congress cataloging team, and I do attend the policy meetings, I provide feedback, has been a really big learning curve. But I think that's one of the beauties of this particular group, is that we want to get more student involvement, we want to get more involvement from many, many professionals with different kinds of expertise. Having said that, the documentation is lengthy and complicated. There's very little training available. It's not like NACO training, where the name authorities training, which is a little more accessible. It's very technical and it's very slow. It takes months and months for this process to happen. So if any of you are interested in getting involved, or if you have more questions about the funnel, please let me know, and I have some things I can point you to. One of the things that kind of binds this panel together, I think, is also how to implement these large national changes, these standardized changes in vocabulary in local settings, perhaps in publisher resources, or in our case, even at our library. And we have tried to do this. I'm not sure it's been successful. We took 4 terms that the African American Subject Funnel had approved, and an intern, Paxton Martin, who was wonderful, she went through and retrospectively tried to enhance records. And it pretty much took her all summer to do 4 terms. So another example of a kind of painstaking nature of some of this retrospective catalog remediation. And I, again and again, especially through the funnel work, the question often comes up, well, how are you working with publishers? How are you implementing this beyond this change at the Library of Congress level? Another project that I'd like to talk about, and I'm going to try to speed up, is a project that is rooted or is based in our archives and special collections. For those of you who may not know, Emory has a very large collection of the works of African American artists and writers. And as part of that collection is an enormous collection of archival photographs, about 12,000 from the 1840s through the 1970s, depicting African American life. When this collection came in, archivists utilized the metadata that existed, and this was from someone who happened to be a white male collector, and much of the metadata was very firmly through his gaze. On top of that, there were many highly offensive images that weren't contextualized in any way. And so in 2020, a group of librarians, including myself and some other individuals involved in larger metadata assessment practices, kind of looking at that at our institution, tried to identify a few of these images to then figure out what the heck do we do with this? Because some of the images were so striking, they really evoked an emotional response that we wanted to address. We didn't get very far, and one of the challenges that we kept encountering was there's so many things we wanted to do, but we wanted to also figure out what we could actually do. And so we did a lot of harmful language statements and some work to identify particularly triggering images, but we still have a long way to go there, and I know that publishers face some of these questions with inherited metadata. Finally, the last project that I'd like to talk about kind of diverges from these more traditional interventions into library systems retrospectively, right? Looking at past practices. In a project, I co-wrote a grant with some colleagues at our special collections to reimagine a print bibliography that was produced in 1998 by James Danke, the longtime bibliographer at Wisconsin. And we're trying to reimagine it in a linked data format. So I have lots of language here so that I don't get it wrong, because again, I'm not the technical service person on the project. But basically, we're structuring the data from the bibliography to create a semantic network that allows us to link with information from LCCN numbers to OCLC numbers to geonames and Wikidata. So we really do hope to enhance some of these records and create kind of a new reference tool, use linked data as a reference tool, and also as a discovery tool, which is where publisher information has come up, because the problem of surfacing digitized newspapers, be it from institutions or from publishers, is a perennial frustration, at least in my world as an African American Studies librarian. So those are some projects. Again, some of the challenges, and I'm running up against time, are our collaboration with the Wayfinder project, which is the Danke bibliography project that I just spoke about, really alluding to some of the things that Elaina said, really getting substantive community engagement, whatever that means, from a predominantly white university doing this work has been a big challenge. And I think with the fatigue following the pandemic and the racial and social justice movements of 2020, some of that became visible through our efforts in that project, and we're still working through that. We're only a year in. And I can speak to other challenges, but I'm a little over time, so I'll stop there and turn it over to...
Yeah, we're going to go to the next question, which is, what are some of the unique challenges of vendors working on creating primary sources collections, and what has worked and what hasn't? I'm going to turn it over to Louise.
Thanks, Elaina. Yeah, so bringing in some different perspectives from a primary source publisher, I'd probably start by saying firstly that really increasing the diversity of the voices of our program and within our collections has been a real focus at AM now for several years. It's not easy work, it's ongoing work, and it's probably just important to preface everything, I think, with that in mind. Fundamentally, we're driven by the need to be really transparent about our editorial vision, our editorial processes, but really to try and bring in more diversity in terms of the source material itself, but also the community involvement in those projects. And I think with that emphasis in mind, it's really important for us to consider what are those challenges and think about how they intersect really with the work of our librarian colleagues. I think, probably the first challenge that I would point to is really the desire to include more diverse primary source content and a lack of a framework actually for publishers to engage with this kind of content. So, one of the things that I think was alluded to is the idea of community engagement and community access. And this is something for which, as a publisher, we feel in a way that we're having to innovate, we're having to, really do things quite differently. There is no consensus, there is no framework for this kind of work. And it is absolutely driven by collaboration with our library partners. In recent years, we've published ethnomusicology with UCLA, with the Holding Archive, and that project was made possible only by access for the communities that provided that content, who we had direct contact with, but it was very much brokered through the archive. We've published American Indian newspapers, and again, that project actually was only enabled through a really close working relationship with the Sequoia Research Institute archivist, actually visiting tribal communities and explaining what the project was, getting their buy-in for including the content, and really building those relationships and building access arrangements as well. But this is work that we're doing afresh for every project. There is no framework, there is no pattern that we can follow, and it's work that we're committed to, but it takes time. I think that, I'd also like to reflect on, from the kind of library perspective, the differing responses that we receive as a publisher to the idea of really opening out community archives and really diverse content and voices, because very naturally lots of holding libraries feel that sense of ownership and safeguarding of these records and the community relationships. So, this is not a barrier to collaboration, but it does mean it takes time. Building trust, building those projects. We're really keen to respond to the needs of the scholarly community, but we can't rush that work. And, bringing our catalogue in the way that we want it to do and ensuring that we have that inclusivity is an ongoing task for us. And I think, beyond that, what we're experimenting with is different menus of licensing options, actually, as a publisher, to ensure that we can really begin to respond to the differing needs of more diverse communities who are keen to depict in our resources and make sure that they're part of that content creation process. Beyond that, I think I'd also like to just point out that the kind of uniqueness of primary source products, that there is an immediacy and a responsibility that we have as a publisher when we are bringing these projects. And there is actually a slight inherent tension, I think, between the need for us and our desire to contextualize and editorialize, and a sort of growing expectation that there will be less of that, actually, that the sources speak for themselves. And trying to sort of broker these differing requirements actually is an ongoing challenge. And I would say that we've leaned really very heavily on our library advisory boards, on our scholarly advisory boards, to inform our approach to framing those collections. Dating collections now is something that we do to really make clear, all of our resources are born out of a specific period in time, scholarly receptions at that time, which do differ, obviously, as we go. And I think, collaboration takes different forms, and our library advisory boards, we really invite candid, genuine feedback. And one of the examples, actually, I think, of collaboration is our Colonial America resource, which published some years ago now. We received some feedback from a faculty member at Emory, actually, and it was really constructive feedback. And I would say it's feedback that has actually informed our approach to further colonial history projects. And it really was around the idea, really, that the enslaved peoples were not sufficiently centered within the resource, and there was a sense in which the kind of history could be elided through not being foregrounded sufficiently. You know, and although this is not necessarily feedback that we've heard frequently, it's important that we respond to that we consider what that means. And what has been really instrumental for us actually is thinking about, you know, practical changes. And this is very much the perspective I'm trying to bring really is, you know, what can we do then as a publisher? And for the release of our Colonial Caribbean project, which was 2021, also built very similarly of colonial office records from the British government, was about really ensuring that we had that diversity in our editorial board, a much larger editorial board underpinning that, really clear introductory framing content, which explains the sort of positionality of the records themselves, but also makes clear and centres the importance of the slave trade actually in the Caribbean and how fundamental that was to the British colonisers. Content warnings, but also additional content is really important to our resources now, and trying to sort of surface those hidden voices. We have within the Colonial Caribbean resource a video essay from Dr. Christy Warren on Elizabeth Douglas, and it's a really interesting video essay, and it really shows, I think, the importance of shedding a light on all of the perspectives actually that do exist within the resource and show the direct perspective of enslaved peoples. I think, you know, beyond that, when we think about what's unique, certainly from the point of view of a primary source publisher, it's about metadata, which is very much where we're trying to sort of come to with this discussion today. For us, it's really thinking about how we are considering that archival metadata that we are working with. This is the way that AM works. We work with the archives generated metadata and we build on it, we enhance it. What can we do to ensure that we have all of the information and the context on the metadata that we are receiving as a publisher, and how can we build a diverse scholarly and librarian group around that really early on to make sure we've got the right advice to broaden those vocabularies. For all of our projects now, we're building controlled vocabularies, subject taxonomies, which underpin all of the work that we do on that resource. So you have a natural consistency in terms of how our editorial teams are dealing with the content. And that's something actually that goes not just for our new resources, but also where we are going back to resources that we've published, which is something I think Kasia is going to touch on. This is an area which is quite challenging for publishers because we're trying to do this work alongside bringing new collections to market. But where we have an opportunity, for instance, if we're moving a resource onto a new platform, we've taken the opportunity to do a really full language review and consider the metadata. So we're in the process at the moment with our American Indian Histories and Cultures resource of, we've engaged a new scholarly board and indigenous advisors to help us draw up a list of about 700 new terms with 250 new peoples identified to really enhance the metadata that's underlying that collection and really embed its use. But, you know, that is ongoing work as well. It does not stop. And I think it's really important we sort of reflect on that. All of our research, our resources have search guides, which explains, you know, what you can expect to find, what you will not find. And the other aspect there is about handwritten text recognition, which underpins these colonial resources and other manuscript-based resources, and really do help to surface some of these voices, because obviously voices like Elizabeth Douglas from the Colonial Caribbean were omitted from the traditional archival metadata because there was no official role there. So all of this helps, I think, and is definitely going in the right direction. But I would also draw attention to the fact that for us, we know that there's lots of reviews going on into LOC headings, and Eric has mentioned some of the work there. I would say that the changes don't necessarily keep pace with the expectations that our publishers are facing, actually, in terms of the publication. And actually, all of the metadata that we generate doesn't necessarily find a home, and that is an inherent challenge for us as well.
So thank you. We're going to get to the next question. After Kasia does it, we're going to check in for Q&A. And the next question is how about working on collections that are comprised of newly commissioned content? What are the unique opportunities when creating new content? And then what has worked and what hasn't?
To start answering that question, just to give a little bit of context to the type of work that we are doing at SAGE, and specifically on the SAGE Research Methods platform that I work on with my team. I think engaging with all of these topics, we've, you know, similarly to Louise at AM, you know, for few years now, and we have been both looking at the content that has been previously published on our platform, and the kind of the controlled taxonomy that is used to tag and describe all of the content there. So I think engaging with questions around diversity and inclusion, and especially the diversity of the topics covered within the content, and but also the authors represented with our collections. Something that we were really keen to do and are currently in the process of doing is essentially creating a new significant, newly written and filmed collection of content that will address some of the gaps that we've previously seen with content that has been previously published on the Sage Research Methods platform. So it's really kind of in the context of that project that I wanted to talk about a few of the challenges and the opportunities that we have seen. I think in a way because we are creating these collections from scratch, we have the opportunity, of course, to set out the scope and as well as the taxonomy at the start of the project, and then essentially through focused commissioning, bring in the new materials that are kind of needed to fill those gaps rather than working with previously created archival content. So I think that working on this project for the last couple of years, I mean, it's been a huge kind of learning experience for our whole editorial team, and has really helped us to kind of consider our own learning and our own biases, but also I think the kind of the set in stone ways in which content is often evaluated, in scholarly academic publishing through both editorial assessment on the publisher's side or vendor side, as well as the peer review. And I think that has been one of the challenges and opportunities that we've looked at is kind of really thinking about the what is the nature of publishable content and well peer-reviewed content, and who is making those decisions as well. So I think something that we have worked hard on is to really creating a much closer relationship with the advisory board, working on this collection to really make sure that those kind of decisions are made in the right way. So I think that has been having that openness to having some of the assumptions and ways of commissioning and reviewing and working with authors being challenged, especially working with some of indigenous scholars contributing to the collection has been really helpful. And I think what we are hoping for is that it's really going to inform the publishing of the content on Sage Research Methods platform for a long time after this particular project is completed. So I think it's really has made us think about the flexibility of our formats and whether they kind of reproduce, I suppose, some of the Western ideas about the content that we are kind of trying to fit into that mold, I suppose. And something else that I just really wanted to briefly touch on before we go into the Q&A was really about the thinking that we have done around understanding our own positionality as publishers and vendors in terms of having that power and responsibility, I suppose, of choosing the content for a new collection, and how those editorial decisions are being made, who personally is making them, also looking at our staff and our own learning, but also the tension, I suppose, between the commercial aspect of these collections, which I think we shouldn't shy away from discussing, especially around working with authors from, or researchers from indigenous communities, or just not affiliated to large institutions that will ultimately have access to the collections that we are putting out. So I think there are a lot of questions there that we're still grappling with around, who owns the data that is included within the collections, who is benefiting from it, but also who has access to it. And that's definitely something that we're considering in terms of, the kind of the commercial aspect and how we can make that content then more accessible.
Thank you. I am relevant of time, and I realize that we're seconds from aquarium, parties with friends, Fender, champagne. So I'm going to turn it over to just for our information, just in case that you needed to rush off or not offended, and that you needed to reach out to us later. But we do have a couple minutes for Q&A if anybody has any burning questions they want to ask right now.